This video was sponsored by Magellan TV. To learn more about our favourite documentary platform and the Vietnam War, and get their offer for our viewers, watch the message at the end of this video. The people living in what is today Vietnam have long been famous for their resistance against great empires, and their spirited defence against Mongol invasions is indeed no exception. In this part of our series on how to defend against the Mongols, we will see how the two kingdoms in what is today Vietnam, Dai Viet in the north and Champa in the south, went about defending their independence against the incursions of Kublai Khan's Mongol-ruled Yuan dynasty in the late 13th century. The kingdom of Dai Viet, or Annam as it was known to the Chinese, had dominated the northern part of Vietnam since the start of the 11th century, centered around the Hong River, with their capital at Thang Long, modern-day Hanoi. Predominantly Buddhist and wealthy through a rich agricultural base, in the 1220s, the ruling Li dynasty of Dai Viet was succeeded by the kings of the Chan family. The new Chan dynasty reformed the kingdom, centralizing power and expanding their agricultural base, strengthening the kingdom. Chinese was the official language of the court, and the Chan made good relations with their neighbors, the Song dynasty to the northeast, to which Dai Viet paid tribute and nominal allegiance in exchange for gifts and lucrative trade. To the northwest, trade flowed with the Dali kings in Yunnan. To the south, a cordial period began with the Chams. The Chams are a part of the far-flung Austronesian people, inhabiting central and southern Vietnam for millennia. For most of their history, they were a collection of small competing Hindu and Muslim kingdoms. However, in the 12th century, they entered a new period of unity in the face of an invasion by the Khmer Empire of Cambodia, the builders of Angkor Wat. United under a king of kings, the Chams repulsed both the Khmer and Dai Viet when they invaded Cham lands. Although not as centralized as Dai Viet, from the mid-12th century onwards, the king of kings, based out of the city of Vijaya, wielded more influence over the other Cham kings and princes. This was the nature of the Kingdom of Champa. This was the political situation in Vietnam when Mongol armies arrived in the mid-13th century. Dai Viet was the first to encounter Mongol armies. In 1253, on his brother's orders, the Grand Khan Mongke, Prince Kublai, marched into Yunnan and conquered the Dali kingdom. Though Kublai returned north, his general, Uriyankadai, stayed in the region and continued to subdue the local peoples. Uriyankadai, the son of the famous Sube'etei, led a series of wide-ranging campaigns across Yunnan, the edges of Tibet, to the small kingdoms on the southwestern edge of the Song dynasty. In this process, Uriyankadai came to the northern border of Dai Viet. The Mongols expected the submission of Dai Viet, but given that the entire aim of the campaign was to open a new front in the Song War, Dai Viet was not a primary target. The immediate strategic concern was to prevent the Chan kings from offering any support to the Song dynasty. Mongke Khan was planning a massive three-pronged assault upon the Song for 1258, and needed Uriyankadai's forces to meet their schedule. With Dai Viet's considerable trade and tribute contacts with the Song, the Mongols wanted to know if the kingdom would not harass Uriyankadai's army. He sent envoys to the Chan court at Thang Long, asking for free passage for the army, but received no response. Curiously, in the winter of 1257, Uriyankadai and his son, Aju, entered Dai Viet with 10 to 30,000 men, Mongols supported by locally raised troops from Yunnan. Splitting his forces into two, Uriyankadai ordered the vanguard to cross the Tao River north of Thanh Long, but not to engage the Viet forces. Uriyankadai knew of the river fleets used by Dai Viet, and desired to draw them into an ambush and thus neutralize their mobility. The vanguard commander did not listen and attacked the Viet, and a frustrated Uriyankadai then advanced to support him. Despite the insubordination and the Viet war elephants, the Mongols had the better of the battle, with Mongol archers focusing on the elephants' eyes. However, a defiant rearguard allowed the Chan leadership to escape the battle via ship, and the always strict Uriyankadai ordered the execution of that vanguard commander. The Chan forces' effort to stop the Mongols from crossing the Fulo River was foiled when the Mongols found a ford to cross and then routed the Chan army. Uriankadai then marched onto the capital city, Tanglong, only to find it abandoned. The Chan king, the government, and most of its population had evacuated the city, taking most of the foodstuffs with them. Vietnamese and Chinese sources differ on precisely what followed. Uriankadai, at least, withdrew and was harassed by local forces as they went. The Chan king then offered tribute to keep the Mongols at bay. While ambushes, heat, humidity, and tropical disease can be blamed, Uriankadai simply did not have the time to stay in Dai Viet any longer, due to Mongol Khan's timetable. After the withdrawal, Uriankadai crossed into the Song dynasty's southwestern border in a failed effort to link up with Mongol Khan. The Chan kings anticipated a continuation of their relationship with the Song, giving tribute every few years to keep the peace and enrich both parties, and Champa followed suit. The Mongols were willing to accept this for a few years, but Mungke's brother and successor Kublai Khan began demanding the Tran and Cham kings confirm their allegiance to him in person. With the fall of the Song in 1279 to Kublai's Yuan Empire, there was no buffer between them. Kublai grew impatient as Dai Viet and Champa sheltered many refugee Song officials. By 1280, Kublai demanded that if the Chan king could not come in person, he must send a massive golden statue of himself and increase tribute to the kingdom's most skilled doctors, artisans, scholars, and most beautiful women. They refused. This was perceived as insubordination, and once the Chams imprisoned Yuan envoys in 1282, Kublai had his pretext for war. Striking at Champa first could place Dai Viet in a vice grip between Yuan China and an occupied Champa. The politically fragmented Champa must have seemed an easy target, Kublai's officials telling him less than 3,000 men would be needed to overrun the Chams. After the failure of the second invasion of Japan in 1281, Kublai was also hungry for victory. Worn out by the intensive 1270s, by the 1280s, Kublai was no longer a patient man and had outlived his wisest advisors and most veteran commanders. Having come to expect total victory, Kublai now demanded it immediately. In December 1282, Sogetu, the governor of Fujian, departed with 5,000 men from former Song lands aboard 100 ships, arriving near the Cham capital of Vijaya in February 1283. Although the city fell after a short fight, the Cham leadership, King Indravarman V and Prince Harijit, escaped into the mountains. Sogetu tried to pursue, but in the jungle his men were ambushed and driven back, and Sogetu retreated to the coast to dig in and ask for aid. The Yuan court's response was slow, still planning for a third invasion of Japan. Only in March 1284, once the third Japanese invasion was finally abandoned, was an army of 20,000 dispatched by sea to aid Sogetu. Delayed by a brief mutiny, they arrived the next month to link up with Sogetu, who had begun attacking Cham cities along the coast. The Cham king Indravarman sent word he was willing to submit, but would be unable to offer tribute due to the plundering. Such concerns did not really bother the Mongols. By August 1284, Kublai's 11th son, Togon, was ordered to march through Dai Viet to assist Sogetu. The Yuan ordered the Chan king to supply this army, but they refused, expecting a trap. At that time, the reigning king was Chan Kam. His father, the previous king, Chan Teng Tong, was still alive but retired, abdicating the throne to act as Emperor Emeritus for his successor, while avoiding that strict court protocol. According to a later chronicle, the Emperor Emeritus, Chan Teng Tong, summoned elders and advisors from across Dai Viet to discuss the best course of action. Supposedly they all shouted in unison, "Fight!" And so the Chans began to prepare for the assault, readying officers and men. Of these, one man is the most famous, Chang Kok Tuan, known by his later title Prince Hungdao. The nephew of the first Chan king and son of a traitorous father, Hungdao was a shining beacon of loyalty and filial piety. Alongside his charisma, his natural talent and skill, made him a favourite for chroniclers to fawn over. One notable blemish marked his character. As a young man, Hung Dao had an affair with an imperial princess engaged to another man. With the oncoming Mongol threat in 1284, Hung Dao marked himself out by his preparations, training men and officers, before taking a leading role in the strategy himself. In January 1285, Kublai Khan's son Togon and a Uyghur general, Arik Kaya, led some 8 tumens from Yunnan into Dai Viet. Accompanying them was an ousted member of the Chan royal family, Chanik Tak, who the Yuan had declared the new king of Dai Viet, and were going to place onto the throne. Another column came from the northwest under Nasir al-Din, who had previously fought in Burma and was a son of the Central Asian Muslim who governed Yunnan. Viet border troops were quickly overcome, and the Yuan advanced south while Sugetu headed north, a great pincer movement on Dai Viet. Prince Hung Dao tried to delay Sugetu but was repulsed, with Sugetu capturing 400 renegade Song officials from Hung Dao's army. By the time Sugetu linked up with Togon, the Yuan had an entire river fleet under the command of Nasir al-Din's son Omar. Omar chased the Chan king to the sea, while Togon and Sugetu captured Tanglong. Armies sent against them were annihilated, and many Chan generals defected to the Yuan forces. But this was the final success of this campaign. Again, Tanglong had been evacuated to deny the Mongols. The Yuan forces and supply lines were overextended, running low on food, while heat and disease took their toll. The Viet troops also employed psychological warfare on the Yuan. In June, one of the Yuan generals was killed, and ambushes ravaged his army. A former Song dynasty officer and his entourage, fighting alongside Viet troops, donned their old armor to panic some Yuan detachments, many of whom were former Song subjects. The fallen Vietnamese had tattooed "Kill the Tartars" on their bodies, angering, frustrating, and frightening Yuan forces. Togon, deeming the position untenable, ordered a poorly organized retreat, which left Sugetu and his army behind. Sugetu attempted to fight his way north, only to be captured and killed, his army surrounded and destroyed. The Viet campaign was a fiasco, one of Kublai's own sons failing to deliver victory. Kublai was so furious he refused to allow Togon into the capital and ordered a third attack. The Chan pretender, Iktak, once more joined them, and great effort was taken to prevent a repeat of logistical issues. A fleet of supply ships was assembled on the southern Chinese coast to ferry troops and provide the food necessary for an army assembled from across the Yuan realm, perhaps 100,000 men, in addition to 500 warships and transports. Togon was given a final chance to redeem himself before his aging father. It should not be imagined that Viet and Champa were unscathed. The Mongols had meted out savage reprisal on any city that fell. Crops and rice fields were destroyed, starvation and horrors greeting the population caught in the middle. Thousands fled into the wilderness to escape the Yuan armies. Their suffering from disease and lack of water and resources goes unmentioned in the sources. The capital of Tanglong had been looted and occupied for the second time in 30 years. In Champa, the evidence is less clear, but it seems Sugetu burned his way through many of the most prominent cities along the coast in his march north. The third invasion began in October 1287. 2 armies marched overland, the main led by Togon. On the sea, Omar and Fan Yi led warships hunting for the Viet navy. The large transport fleet followed some days behind Omar's armada. Togon's troops defeated several Dai Viet armies, marching to Van Kiep on the Bac Dang River to await the arrival of Omar's fleet, who arrived after his own victories. Despite early success, neither force had enough supplies, relying on the transport fleet. But that fleet was dispersed by a storm and then destroyed by the Viet Navy, which, under Chiang Kai-shek, had avoided Omar's warships. With this maneuver, the Yuan plan was broken. Food supplies ran low, and Togon again took Tanglong in February 1288, only to find it stripped bare again. Once Togon learned of the loss of the supply fleets, he withdrew to the stockades they had constructed at Van Kiep, and by the end of March, with his men on the verge of starvation, he ordered a general retreat. Now the Viet forces sprung their trap. The Yuan army's route was harried by ambushes and the destruction of roads and bridges to hamper their movements. Tropical diseases spread among malnourished men and beasts, humidity warped their bows, and the trees howled with the sounds of alien creatures, ensuring sleepless nights. Togon, the great-grandson of Chinggis Khan, showed his pedigree by hiding in a copper tube on the march, then abandoning the troops to board a warship to sail home. On April 9, 1288, Omar's fleet was sailing past the mouth of the Bac Dang River when Viet ships, led by Prince Hung Dao, sailed out to meet him at high tide. Omar took the bait. Hung Dao fled back up the river, Omar in pursuit. Hung Dao's smaller and lighter craft cruised by in safety, but wooden stakes placed along the river bottom impaled the larger Yuan vessels, holding them in place as the tide receded. With the Yuan ships immobilized, Hung Dao attacked. Helpless, many Yuan soldiers drowned in the river or fell to the arrows of Dai Viet, and Omar was captured. The other fleet commander, Fan Yi, attempted to rescue Omar, but his vessels were boarded, Fan Yi himself killed in the fighting. Some 400 Yuan ships were captured, capping off a campaign which saw most of its land forces destroyed in the wilderness. 1288 proved a total fiasco. Only a few years after the destruction of the Great Armada off the shores of Kyushu, another fleet and army were destroyed with little to show for it. Togon was sent into political exile after both disastrous campaigns, his son another disgrace to add to Kublai's troubles of the 1280s. The Mongol failure cannot simply be reduced to the jungle. It was a factor, as the tropical heat, humidity and disease wore down troops unused to the environment. But we can identify more immediate causes. The destruction of the cities was an insufficient threat, and unable to capture the Viet or Cham kings, the Mongols were denied their tools to disable the enemy defense. The Mongols struggled to supply themselves due to ambushes or vulnerable supply fleets. Most importantly, Yuan leadership totally underestimated Vietnamese resilience, hampered by the inept and inexperienced Togon and a demanding, unrealistic Kublai. In contrast, the military leaders of Dai Viet, skilled men like Prince Hung Dao, learned from their mistakes, maximized their strengths, and struck the Yuan when they were most vulnerable. While often victorious in the initial field engagements, the Yuan could not turn these into strategic successes. Still, both Dai Viet and Champa had suffered terribly over both campaigns, and Kublai threatened another attack until his death in 1294. After that, relations eased between Yuan, Dai Viet and Champa. The kingdoms in Vietnam paid tribute to the Yuan Khans for trade access, gave a nominal submission, and were spared another Mongol assault. Vietnam had a long and tragic history of foreign invasions, but the Vietnamese seemingly always found a way to defend their country. Our friends at Magellan TV have an excellent 3-episode documentary series called The Vietnam War that tells the compelling story of the Vietnam War, beginning with the country's dynastic history. It details the impact of Christian missionaries and French colonialism, Japan's invasion during World War II, the rise of Ho Chi Minh, and how the USA's fear of communism started a relentless sequence of events that caused American troops to go in under President Kennedy in 1961. The conflict escalated under Lyndon B. Johnson in 1965, when the nation was entwined in a war fought nightly on TV, engendering a huge anti-war movement. By 1975, Nixon had resigned, and America was forced to withdraw from Saigon. Magellan TV has hundreds of documentaries tailored for history fans and beyond. That is only the beginning of Magellan's collection, and there's plenty of stuff from outside the realm of history as well, and more is being added constantly. For some high-quality history content, use our special link in the description, and Magellan TV will give you a month of access for free. Our series on how the various peoples defended against the Mongols will continue in the near future, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.